are so honored to have our Maricopa County Attorney, Adel, with us. She has said that it's okay to call her Allister, and so I will do that. It feels uneasy, but I will. And we are just, thank you so much. We know you're busy. We know that you have, incredible demands on your time. And so we're here today simply to have, a good discussion so that we can get to know you a little bit better and that our listening audience can, hear more about you. We met with your opponent yesterday, and that was fun. And so we're looking for another good moment with you today. And especially as a woman, I'm just so honored that you're in the position that you're in, and that either way, we will still end up with a woman in office. So yay for our team, But anyway, I would like to open up. I am Billy Fidlin. I am the president of the board of directors of Arizona Faith Network. I'm also director of outreach and justice for all United Methodist churches in Arizona and Southern Nevada. And then I'm also founder and president of Whisper and Thunder, which is a Native American nonprofit. But we have with us today Khalil Rushdan, and Khalil serves on our board of directors, and then handling the tech side for us today is David Topping. And so welcome to everybody that is here, and a special welcome to you.
Thank you.
In terms of theological framing for this session, I would just like to read a statement that we have from the Arizona Faith Network for our viewers today. The faith traditions affirm the basic dignity and worth of each human individual and call for reform of a legal system that results in the mass incarceration of persons in the United States. All of our faiths tell us that God, as understood in each of our faith traditions, is concerned with the well-being of all persons, regardless of gender, race, ability, and/or economic standing, and is merciful and is forgiving. Our combined scriptures speak of the Holy One, God, as one who seeks to restore relationship and community. That the Holy One is merciful and punishes to bring transformation and renewal, not out of revenge. We understand our own moral imperative to be an imitation of these characteristics of the divine. I do want to say that at the Arizona Faith Network, we consider ourselves a bridging agent. And so we're a safe place where people who may or may not agree can peacefully have a dialogue in a safe place. And so with that, I welcome everyone to today's Smart Justice Cafe. And now I'd like to turn it over to Khalil.
Thank you, Billy. My name is Khalil Rushdan. For those who don't know, I am a board member of Arizona Faith Network, but also someone who is directly impacted by incarceration and some of the things that we will discuss today. The work I do in the community on several different platforms and as a criminal justice consultant, there is a bigger need to end punitive culture. The punitive culture of being tough and being non-forgiving on crime has to change to where we as a community can come together and start a healing process. So when we talk about that notion of second chances, the second chance is not just for the person who may have been charged or convicted of a crime, and it's time for them to re-enter our society, but it's also a second chance for the community to change that punitive culture. And for someone who is coming out trying to do the right things, allow them that opportunity to have stable employment, housing, and then integrate back into our community. So the opportunity to attend this cafe and the purpose of why it was founded, the cafe was a great opportunity to center the leadership of those directly impacted. However, allow those individuals impacted to share their stories and experiences with the overall community. The impacted person, the family member, the community member, is allowed to sit down in a cafe and do the one thing that we have gotten away from, and that's just talk, communicate, open up a dialogue. So once we do that, it allows us to break down barriers and invite truths. So now the whole community can understand not just what the problems are or the systemic issues that plague us all and have been plaguing us, but also how we can come together to build paths to forgiveness, connect as a community, and have that real love and bond. One of the biggest barriers of the criminal legal system, like I said earlier, is to change that culture to punish people instead of investing in restorative healing. Some of this culture to punish people is perpetuated by fears that individuals commit worse offenses upon release from prison. So let's just throw that book at them by creating harsher sentences and laws. To break down that stereotype and them stigmas, you should always have an impacted person share their experiences firsthand and also be a part of the solutions and the work that needs to be done afterwards. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and turn it back over to Billy Fiddlin. I keep wanting to call her Miss Fiddlin, to Billy, and then we can open up this discussion with Adele, as she said.
Okay, you can call me Allister. It's fine.
We respect your office, so you have.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm honored.
Well, and also, Allister, I want you to know I teach leadership out at Perryville Prison. It's one of the most meaningful things that I've ever done. I've worked with gang members all my whole life, but this trumps that. And also, I am the justice person for our denomination in Arizona and Southern Nevada. So those are the lens that I look at this through. But before we get to any of the questions, I just want to give you an opportunity to tell our viewers, a little bit about yourself. What would you like us to know that maybe we don't know in the last year?
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me. I met my now husband. We've been together 23 years at U of A, and I went to law school at ASU to be a prosecutor and got called upon to serve in executive level leadership in state government with the Department of Transportation, running their executive hearing office. So the administrative law judges, if you will, that regulates 20,000 cases a year. Who knew ADOT did that, right? And then I went to the Department of Child Safety to be the first ever general counsel. And I threw myself into nonprofit work as well. I'm a proud Rotarian, past president of Phoenix Rotary 100, where we focused on raising awareness and advocating for resources for human trafficking. I was the first woman chair of the 100 Club of Arizona, where we stand behind the men and women who stand behind the badge. And I recently was appointed as chair of the advisory board for Child Health of Arizona. So all those matter to me very much. And to piggyback off your comment about Perryville, so I was on the inaugural advisory board for ASU's Public Service Academy. This is an undergraduate program. It's a certificate where we talk about cultivating the next generation service corps. So if you're not going to go work in public service, give back to your community in some way. Be on a board, volunteer, something. And we had students go out and teach the women at Perryville as well as part of their community service, because they have to do a significant amount of community service during the year. So I think that, and I taught cross-sector collaboration, so public-private, nonprofit partnerships, because I truly believe if we're going to solve some of our social justice issues, we all have to work together. Other than that, I'm a mother of 2 school-aged children. They're a year apart and have the same birthday. So they keep me busy and I love it. And I'm just so honored to be the first woman county attorney. Greatest job in the world that I worked so hard to get to, and I'm going to continue to work hard, protect public safety, and make everyone proud.
Thank you for that. And I love Child Help. Child Help was the first nonprofit I visited when I came to Arizona in 1999. And I'm so impressed with, not with what they do, but how they do it.
Yes.
Amazing, amazing work. And so that's awesome. And I do appreciate the ASU student and their commitment to doing good deeds in the county and working very hard to make the world a better place. That's a huge compliment to ASU's leadership and how they go about education. All right, well, let's get to some things. Certainly, everything that we think about, we always frame it with human dignity in that lens of justice. And so that is where AFN is concerned. We absolutely believe in intersection, which you alluded to, and the working of partners together. And I agree with you totally. We have so much going on in this world. We need to work together, and we don't need to have things dividing us. We need things to unite us. So first things we're going to talk about are police accountability. There are several campaigns occurring calling for transformative policing reforms in light of the recent killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Deanne Johnson, so many more. Do you feel that the calls for police reform have legit concerns? And just in general, what are your thoughts about that, Allister?
So hearing from the community is evidence that change to fix the discrepancies in our criminal justice system and having an open dialogue is going to be absolutely essential to effectuate any change. There are many in our community who feel that justice is out of reach. And I want to express my support for those who seek justice. Yes, there are legitimate concerns, but we can only make meaningful change if everyone is willing to come together, listen and understand the concerns of the community, of law enforcement, and work on them together. And Billy, I think you alluded to this in your opening comments. We might not always agree, but this starts with the conversation. I continue to meet with organizations that want to see our criminal justice system be better, faith-based communities, as well as prominent community leaders, to hear their concerns and their ideas on reform, because it's a conversation that we have to have. Not just our community, the nation needs to have. And that's part of the reason why I formed a community advisory board of those leaders. In fact, I think Khalil's on there as well. And I appreciate his guidance too, because it starts with having a conversation and not just burying our head in the sand. So yes, there are concerns, because all of us, we're in this together, especially now.
And I recognize the difficulty, you know, of the position of enforcing policy and all the rest of it. And by the way, I think people have already caught on, but you can, folks, submit your questions through the chat feature, not through Q&A, but through the chat feature. And we will get to them as we can. And Allister, if you see a question pop up that you think, oh, I want to answer this right now, as opposed to the end, you go ahead and do that, whatever, you know, whatever is good for you. All right. Another question, there are several members of the community that believe that the accountability of law enforcement officers will be compromised when prosecutors have close relationships with the police. How would you address this mistrust and improve relationships between the most marginalized communities and your office?
Well, let me be clear to everyone, whether you are law enforcement or not, if you commit a crime, you will be held accountable. In fact, during my time as your Maricopa County Attorney, I have charged police officers. Our ethical duty is to look at the facts that will go into evidence and see if there's a reasonable likelihood of conviction. I am committed to transparency and accountability, which is why I extended our critical incident review committee, who reviews officer-involved shootings, to include non-attorney staff members, but also members of the public, because that's critical. I also established a public-facing dashboard that provides data about the cases submitted to our office, and demographics are on there. Case resolution is on there. And we're hiring an expert to examine that data, to review it and see if the variabilities in there are of the severity that we think they might be or not be, then we have to address that. But we need to do all this, as with all criminal justice reform efforts, with data. To increase accountability in the office, I also created a conviction integrity unit. So when there's claims of actual innocence, when there are claims by our prosecutors, when they see things on a body-worn camera or in a police report where they feel it was inappropriate behavior or excessive force, they report it to this experienced prosecutor. Restoring trust in this office is a top priority of mine. And there's often, questions about how members of the community would look at the accountability of law enforcement. And I can tell you that under my tenure, police have absolutely been held accountable, and they will be held accountable. But again, The public might not understand that we have our ethical duties of charging standards. And again, this is why I brought on members of the critical incident review team to make a recommendation on whether charges should be brought against an officer in a given case.
You can see in the chat, there's a number of multiple questions with regard to the shooting of Deanne Johnson. And so in talking about the accountability, and also transparency, I know in lots of areas in life, we get in trouble when we're not completely transparent, and then people, have many, many questions. And so can you address, recognizing there may be limitations legally, can you address why the officer has not been charged to date for the death of Deanne Johnson, please?
Anytime there's a loss of life, it's tragic. And anything I say or do can't bring back Mr. Johnson or give comfort to his family and friends. Anytime that we have a situation like where Mr. Johnson was killed, more information is good information. It's helpful. We had a trooper that approached Mr. Johnson's vehicle, was trying to effectuate an arrest for a supposed DUI, drunk driving, and a fight ensued. Would it have been helpful to have body-worn cameras? Would it have changed the outcome? I can't say for sure if it would change the outcome. But the trooper and the second one that arrived, who ultimately rendered aid to Mr. Johnson before he was taken to a hospital, they didn't have body-worn cameras. I've been having these discussions about body-worn cameras on officers in the field since the day I started in October of last year. Our governor also made a call for it in his State of the State address in January. I sent a letter to the legislature and made a public calling for it after the death of Mr. Johnson, because at least we would have an idea of what happened that night. So the committee that I talked about, Critical Incident Review Committee, with 4 members of the public on there, reviewed the facts and circumstances that would come into evidence. Sometimes I've been asked about the record of the trooper. His record and Mr. Johnson's record would not come in at trial, and they weren't considered. But that committee made a recommendation that per our ethics, per our duty legally, there was no reasonable likelihood of conviction. And while it's tragic and it's frustrating, that is exactly why this is the type of situation where we must have body-worn cameras for all officers in the field.
Is there and I'm asking this out of my own ignorance and naivete, is there something in discipline that happens to an officer if he knowingly turns off his camera? Is there an automatic, this is a big problem and you're going to be penalized for it?
That's a great question for the police departments. I don't know what their administrative policies are. Every police department's different with their body-worn camera usage. And typically the officers that have body-worn cameras, they're deployed in the field. So you have your officer that's, let's say a detective or working behind a desk. They're not necessarily going to have a body-worn camera. But every police department is different in how they do that.
Okay. You can say we have a lot of things in the chat that we will get to at some point, we hope. I do want to move forward to a question. Do you support eliminating qualified immunity for law enforcement? Because that gets back to my camera question and everything else.
There's a lot of confusion about this topic. Qualified immunity is not meant to protect bad police officers. It protects the good ones. An officer who clearly violates a person's rights or uses excessive force, they're not protected by qualified immunity, and nor should they be. Those officers are still going to have to answer for their actions when they do those things that they shouldn't be doing. So while qualified immunity for police officers is not an issue that the county attorney's office deals with on a regular basis or at all, quite frankly, taking away the rule that could lead to a real shortage of capable police officers, that's a concern. So, you know, immunity for them is a complicated topic. There are still civil and criminal remedies for the officers that are behaving badly. And again, if an officer commits a crime, in my office, he will be held accountable. But remember, when somebody gets stripped of their immunity, whether an officer or a prosecutor in a civil case, that's significant. And that's something that people should pay attention to.
And
Well,
yeah, I want to add to that. Because on the community level, when we talk about the community mistrust, and several people are concerned more about, it's not that, you know, most people call them lawbreakers. They're not figuring, hey, I'm breaking the law. We have a genuine concern when historically there's a blue wall of silence. You know, when we talk about qualified immunity, you know, and I totally understand that there may be officers who go who are out there in the interest of public safety, but when you have individuals who go out and they go beyond, that's where it kind of gets sticky, because the public is like, well, wait a minute, we've been trying to have this transparency, and over time that there's been a lack of transparency. We don't know all the facts. We're trying to get all the facts. In some instances, I'm out in the community and those family members can't even get the property of their deceased loved ones, let alone get solid answers. And, you know, when we talk about equal protection under the laws and you know, the overall community coming together to address issues, a large portion of the community kind of feels like they're disconnected from the process. And that's why, you know, the question of how do we build that trust, because a lot of these people feel more marginalized than they ever did before, especially when there are still blue walls of silence that go on. Those so-called good officers are not reporting the bad officers, because, I mean, under normal circumstances, you would think that this would be handled internally, that those good officers would get rid of or turn in those bad ones who are carrying this misconduct out. Lastly, talking to some of the police chiefs in the states, there's a bigger concern, because even when those officers are disciplined, and a police chief, as the police chief in Mesa, his name is slipping my mind, tried to discipline those officers, and then there was calls from union and pressure from unions, police unions, to get rid of him for disciplining officers. How do we resolve that? You know, how do we move past that?
Khalil, those are all good questions, and I want to make sure that I answer all of them. I'm going to probably go backwards to forwards. As far as the unions, you know, their job is to protect the officers that are members, and not all of the officers are members. They're an employment function, and you know, in my office, we don't really have anything to do with them. I'm not beholden to a union. So that's a good question to ask them, and I certainly can understand a frustration of a leader, a police chief that is trying to effectuate change or do what they believe is correct, and they get outside political pressure. Now, the police chiefs are appointed by the cities. They're not elected. In my position, I answer to the people, and that's why I will do the right things for the right reasons every single time. Now, we talked about, you mentioned the question about families not being able to get information and transparency, and I hope that I answer your question effectively. If I don't, please follow up with me. I have a commitment to transparency. I've shown that, I've demonstrated that. For example, my predecessor told police never to release body-worn camera footage. I lifted that. They can release body-worn camera. That's the law. If there's a public records request, who am I to tell a police chief not to release body-worn camera footage? That's not my job. That's in their purview. They have their job. I've got mine. As to not being able to get property back, I would welcome specific cases so that I can take a look at that. Sometimes if there's an ongoing investigation, the property is held for whatever reason. And again, without specifics, I don't know that I can answer that. I can tell you though, while I can't speak to police departments, I'm not a police chief, and unions, I'm not a part of a union, never have been. I can speak to my office and what I've done. And that is making sure that our lawyers and staff are trained and equipped to recognize when there's excessive use of force and report it. Our lawyers know that everyone who commits a crime will be held accountable. Under my tenure, we have charged officers who have shot people, raped people, revenge porn, you name it. If they wear a uniform, it does not matter. Now, do we work with them? Absolutely, sure we do. And when there's calls for an independent review, things like that, we as prosecutors wield great power, and I recognize that. From the state bar, our ethical rules are higher than any other lawyer. And we have a duty to be fair and impartial. And that includes protecting a defendant's rights as well. And when one of our prosecutors does not do that, I have zero tolerance for inappropriate behavior, whether it be unethical, incompetence, sexual harassment. Because under my tenure, I keep saying to our staff, and they know this because the hardworking men and women of the county attorney's office, we want them to be character-driven professionals, doing the right things for the right reasons every single time, even if it's a difficult decision. So Khalil, I have no idea if I answered your question effectively. Is there any other follow-up you have for me on that?
No, I mean, well, I do just have a comment because we've seen this play out in the interest of the young man, Robert Johnson, going back to Mesa. You know, the community knows that Mesa police has historically had problems with brutality and disrespect. A lot of those communities feel under siege, but I want to say this because it took a surveillance video camera to come out first before the public actually seen the police footage. But by the time the body cams were released, I mean, these officers had falsified the reports. And, you know, myself being convicted on a wrongful conviction, they also falsified, or charges were falsified against this man who the police clearly attacked. However, they charged him with disorderly conduct. And I think it was, what was it, assault on officer? It was 2 charges, which were later dismissed. In the interest of that transparency, which I know you have been trying to make more of that commitment and making sure. I know the county attorney's office is only one side of it, but then the police departments are also the other side. Have you ran into any encounters where there is that blue wall of silence that affects investigations?
You know, the administrative investigations, we don't have any part of that. The criminal investigations, they have a right as any other suspect. They can invoke their Miranda rights and not answer us, same as any other suspect. So while I can't speak to the administrative side of it, that's for the police agencies to investigate conduct on the job. When it comes to a criminal investigation, they're treated like any other suspect, and they have the same exact rights. I can tell you that the only incident that I've seen of an officer not giving an interview or something right away was, gosh, it was a couple months ago, and they waited like a week, I think, and they wanted their counsel with them, which is, they have a right to counsel just as any other suspect, but they're treated exactly the same.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I'm wondering, how do you feel about the community calls for defunding or divesting in the police departments and then utilizing the funds for other community restoration programs?
Well, recent calls to defund the police have been coming from a variety of groups and a variety of forms, quite frankly. And defunding the police is not the answer. Keeping communities safe is my top priority. But in order to do that, there's some key components that have to happen. You have to have a well-funded police force, law enforcement agencies who are trained and provided the resources so that they can return home to their families every night. But also, equally as important, you must have community services and resources for those who face issues such as mental illness, addiction, domestic violence. You must also have a prosecution agency, which I'm proud to run, the third largest one in the nation, that hold people accountable. And as a community, we have to find a way to create and fund these systems that support all three of these elements, because this is not an either-or situation at all. We have to work together. These are social justice issues. We want a safe community. Without public safety, we lose a good economy. We lose safety in schools. We lose protection for our children, our most vulnerable. But we have to work together, and all three of those elements have to converge.
You mentioned about the calls for defunding the police coming from a variety of groups. Certainly the marches that we have seen in past months, not only here in Phoenix, but elsewhere. And some of those were peaceful, and they also had components of them that were destructive. But we know that in Phoenix, as well as in other states across the country, we had innocent people that were arrested, peaceful marchers that were arrested. How do you talk about that in terms of their prosecution or their...
So I can tell you that I 100% support peaceful speech, First Amendment rights. That's what our country was built on. Our right to peacefully assemble, our right to have our voice heard. When it turns to criminal activity, when you break into Scottsdale Fashion Square Mall and loot, that's a crime. I can tell you that of the cases submitted to our office, we turned down, meaning refused to prosecute, 118 people because it didn't rise to the level of a crime, what they were doing. So when the police make an arrest, these people go to court for their release conditions, their bond, or on their own, and then we make a charging decision. 118. We said no. The ones that we are focused on that we have charged are mainly related to those that have, literally destroyed property or hurt people. That's when it crosses the line. So I want to be very clear about that our prosecutors look at the facts and the evidence of what is right. So to say that we went after people that were peacefully protesting is absolutely incorrect.
So, I hear you. So, in our commitment to transparency, a lot of the questions on the chat are revolving around this or something related to it. Transparency, mistrust in general, and lack of respect for the police and any related offices. How do we take those steps to get back to a place where there's at least some level of trust? And, for me, transparency is key, to readily and quickly be transparent about everything from the release of footage to, no, we didn't prosecute X number and this is why. How do we get those kinds of facts to the public, which in turn helps to bring down the temperature?
I love this question because what you're asking is what I have been committed to even when I started the interview process to be your county attorney. So I would like to expand on my commitment to transparency and what we've done and accomplished in just 1 year despite a pandemic. The first is you mentioned data. As I stated, we have a forward-facing data dashboard. The county attorney's office has never had that before. You can see the kinds of cases, or the cases that are submitted, how they're resolved, demographic information. That is part of our commitment. We have completely redone how we do public records requests. It used to take months up to a year for a public records request to be fulfilled. We looked at efficiencies. Those are going out in days to weeks. To restore confidence, I understand that the community needs to restore confidence, not just in the county attorney's office, but the criminal justice system as a whole. And that's again why I'd like to say what we've accomplished in the last year. One of them is we took a treatment-first approach, looking at the offender, not the offense. What were they arrested for? Might not be what's causing it. Were they pawning a ring because they have a drug addiction? You know, did they have disorderly conduct because they have a mental illness? Let's get them the treatment they need to do better and be successful. We also created the first ever home detention program in Maricopa County. The cities have them. Maricopa County never did. We do now. So if you have a DUI, you will have little disruption to work, school, family. The other ways we're restoring confidence in our system, and again, committed to transparency, is when we talk about a conviction or public integrity, or excuse me, conviction or prosecution integrity unit, to bring forth claims of actual innocence. And let me be very clear. I've withdrawn the death penalty in cases under my tenure. I am committed to this community as a member of this community to doing the right things for the right reasons every time. I am very different than my predecessors as the first woman county attorney. We are working collaboratively, and that is very key for me, with the indigent defense bar, the private defense bar, the courts. In fact, during COVID, we worked with them to see who could be released from jail and not exposed to the coronavirus. We are working collaboratively with them now on a mental health task force. And again, we created a community advisory board to have these conversations with underrepresented communities, faith-based leaders, nonprofits, community activists, to again have a dialogue. And those are all steps that I have taken to make sure that we are committed to transparency and accountability, all with an eye to keeping the public safe.
So you would say, with regard to the community advisory board, that you already include grassroots organizations?
We do have a couple grassroots organizations on there. We've got one, shoot, the name escapes me. It's out of Maryvale. And we have faith-based leaders. It's actually a very diverse group. I'm so honored to have them. We have professors even. Again, we've got nonprofits that work with homeless youth. We've got Khalil on there too, with his guidance. And we have members of the community from all walks of life, but also in different spheres of influence, so that we have a broad understanding of what's going on in their communities. And to give you an example, it's not just them giving information to us. We want to give them information as well about how we're being proactive in the community to keep families safe, to keep children from vaping, cyberbullying, things like that, to arm them with resources. And so it really is a two-way street, because I want to hear what they have to say and listen to their concerns, and I want to engage them. When I've previously made a big decision on an officer-involved shooting, we asked the community advisory board to meet with me right after that, after the press conference, to explain to them my decision, so that they could tell those in their community, because the community is owed that. And again, that is part of my commitment to being collaborative and transparent.
We have a question in the chat that's related. Russell says, I thought the judge threw those 118 arrests out, not the CAO. Can you please clarify?
That's not the case. So how this works is that someone is arrested, and an initial appearance judge did throw out, meaning did not find probable cause on a significant number of arrestees, and that's their job. If there's no probable cause, they're going to release them. But we had a significant number that the judge did find probable cause and set release conditions that came to us for a charging decision.
Okay, and then another question, they wanted to know how many cases have you overturned?
Overturned, and I guess I'm not following the question, but as far as convictions, or is that the question? Because I'm not following the chat too much, just because I'm talking so much, I apologize.
That's okay, because it's hard to follow. It's moving like lightning, but well, can you help clarify that?
If it's about convictions,
Wrongful convictions, they just put in the chat.
Yeah, they just clarified on chat.
How many wrongful convictions have you overturned?
So we rely on like the Innocence Project or a defense bar to come to us to have something reviewed for a possible wrongful conviction. And during my tenure, we had one actually that I submitted a letter to the Clemency Board and the governor to commute this person's sentence, to have them released. It wasn't necessarily overturned, but I believe that the person should be released. And so there's only been one. Now we have some that come to us, and we only had a couple actually that come to us, and we work collaboratively with the Justice Project and Lindsay Herf and her operation to take a look at things. And oftentimes we both uncover things and decide maybe this isn't the answer. Maybe it's not overturning a conviction, maybe it's reducing a sentence. But all with keeping in mind that if there's a victim involved, we have to still comply with victims' rights.
I think that the anger level, you know, it's always interesting, first of all, if people have been personally affected and the energy that they bring to a conversation. I know for myself, you know, and the many women that I know in Perryville, and I know that their stories and the inconsistency in sentencing and all the rest of it, you know, all of us can go on about that. But I think what I'm hearing you say is you rarely work in a vacuum, that you're working with other groups, other people, other advisors, and you don't come to the decision necessarily leading up to a decision. You've not done it alone. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely accurate.
Okay, thank you. That's
any major decisions, I don't presume to have all the answers. I don't presume to know everything. I surround myself with a good team that's objective, and they can tell me every side of the story, good, bad, and the ugly. And ultimately, I make the decision. That's true. But I want to make sure that I have all the facts and that I have advice from every angle.
Thank you. Danielle, we're going to get to the mandatory minimums in a bit. All right, I want to move on to hate crimes. With the Arizona Faith Network, we are comprised of many faith practices. It's not only Christian, it's also Muslim, it's also Jewish, it's Sikh, it's many others, and we are in a constant state of growth. We hear about the hate crimes firsthand from rabbis, etc. And so what are your thoughts with regard to, we do not have a specific hate crime legislation on the books in our state, and how would you address attacks on these religious communities? You know, and you said it very concise. I was shocked too when I moved here that, and even now, we still don't have a hate crime statute on the books, and most other jurisdictions do. I can tell you that in my office, there is absolutely zero tolerance for attacks on religious communities. So Arizona law currently classifies hate crimes basically as like an aggravator or enhancement to a sentence. So whether it's you know, arson, aggravated assault, the underlying offense will get charged. But then we have an enhancement or aggravator, that it might be, you know, race, gender, bias based, or it could be part of furthering a criminal street gang, things like that. So we use that to enhance the sentence. But there was a lot of my legislative agenda this past year, and obviously the legislature dispersed early because of the pandemic. And so these conversations, along with the conversations I was having about criminal justice reform and meaningful expungement laws, we will resume those. We're still having those conversations in a bipartisan manner, and hopefully the legislature will resume as normal in January, and we can get to doing the work we need to do. Have you specifically reached out to the Jewish and Muslim communities and had conversations with those? And excuse me for coughing. I apologize.
We have, because we, not only with our community advisory board, we also have a business advisory board. And so incorporating those is critical. And the fact that we are looking at, a broader way that we can look at diversity and inclusion inside the office is absolutely critical to me. Because while we're a diverse community, we're still one community.
And continuing on with the theme of hate crimes, what about the GLBTQIA community? And how can Arizonans be assured that you'll seek justice for them when they're the survivors or the victims of crime?
Well, I can tell you that I've always made a commitment to that community, evidenced by the fact that I, and this is just anecdotal, but even before I was the county attorney, I signed the One Community Unity Pledge as an individual. And then I made sure the county attorney's office did that. And then thankfully the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors followed suit and did the same thing. Because especially in hiring and treatment, we need an inclusive community. I have members of that community on my executive team. When it comes to crime, I will say, just with law enforcement as well. If somebody commits a crime, they will be prosecuted. If somebody is a victim, it does not matter. Your race, your gender, your sexual preference, it does not matter. You are a victim and we will stand up for you and protect you.
Would you be willing to take part in a pride parade?
Oh yeah, actually I did that, gosh. Well, I think it was in college, it was a while ago, but yeah, absolutely.
Going forward. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Khalil now.
Okay, legislative agenda is the next topic of conversation here. MCAO historically lobbies lawmakers on a variety of issues. Do you support efforts to end cash bail? And I know that it is a legislative fix in this sense. However, prosecutors, they do ask for cash bail, or they do ask for bail in some instances. But overall, the legislative fix, would you support basically the confinement, when it's more of a cash profit for an industry versus securing a person for their next court date? Would you support the efforts to end cash bail practices?
Well, I'm going to give you a multi-part answer on that one because we have bond here in Arizona, and bond is not meant to be punitive. It is not to create a debtor's jail. It is not to hold people in custody because they're poor. And we as prosecutors, we will not do that. Our prosecutors advocate for bond when it's appropriate to some of the things that you mentioned. It's there to secure appearance, and it is to protect the public and perhaps the victims. A few years ago, the Arizona Supreme Court adopted an assessment that the judges use from the Arnold Foundation to look at likelihood to reoffend, intimidate witnesses, appear in court, those things. And the judges have that when they decide to set bond, when the judges decide to set bond. And the judges rarely set cash bond. Our lawyers rarely ask for cash bond. They ask for bond when it's appropriate, but often people are released on their own recognizance, meaning they're allowed to be released because we know that they're going to be trusted to show up in court. Cash bond is very, very rare, and I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there about that. But again, it's bond, not bail. It's in our statute, it's in our Constitution that people are entitled to this and not just to be held. Am I supportive of looking at a different risk assessment, a newer risk assessments for the judges to use when they set the bond? Absolutely. In the rare circumstance where someone asks for a cash bond, I expect that it is the worst of the worst. Because again, we want people to have little disruption to their lives as they're working through the criminal justice system, because many of those folks can participate in our diversion program where they can do better and be better. And in fact, during the pandemic, when we were looking at people in custody that really would have spent more time in custody than they ever would have been sentenced to, We looked at modifying their release conditions because, again, it's about doing the right things for the right reasons, but also balancing that with the need for public safety.
So a quick follow-up to that, because we did ask Julie the same question. Can data be publicly facing or public facing, showing that cash bond is rare, and then could it also be included in the dashboard? In other words, there's information coming, and we there's reports that we haven't been able to substantiate yet. However, we're hearing many reports that some of these protesters, which the one I can substantiate is it's a good associate of mine who was a legal observer, and she was charged and arrested. This also affected her status because she's a DACA student, and we know for a fact that she wasn't breaking any laws. She was actually there just observing. However, there are bonds being placed on the heads of people who are arrested that are the protesters, in essence, up to $10,000. So if you have that, and this came through the chat, if you have that information, could you also make that public facing, or are you willing to make that public facing?
Well, if I had the information and if we had it, sure. But wait, that's a question for the sheriff. We don't get that information on every case. We just don't. Sometimes we don't know what the bond or release condition is. Sometimes these cases are sent to the cities, and then they have their own bond or release conditions. So that is a question for the sheriff to answer, and that's on the sheriff and possibly the courts. I think they keep that information as well. But again, that's not something that we are able to track. That is a question for the sheriff.
Okay. But if you have that, you wouldn't have an issue making it transparent if you had that.
I have no problem with that. I mean, we're not hiding anything here.
Okay.
All of this is public. The truth is the truth.
Right. And that's all I want. Because we know that a variety of departments have the information, but okay, moving on to the next question real quick. Would you advocate to eliminate mandatory minimums? We know that, there was discussion, these mandatory minimums were put in place to so-called catch dealers. However, we see several individuals who are users get caught up, and then also the justification for extensive sentences for those who are in dealer situations.
So we need a review of our sentencing guidelines that were established in 1994 that better also reflects my office's approach of treatment first. For example, simple possession of meth. It's class 4 felony with mandatory minimums. That is the same classification as burglary and assault. Somebody that has, organized retail theft or theft of stolen property, that kind of thing. Again, pawning a friend's ring at a pawn shop to get money for drugs is a class 3 felony. I'm sorry, actually, I think it's a class 2. We charge murderers with that. So we do need to have a look at these things, because it's not lost on me that, I would prosecute somebody for killing somebody while they were drunk in a car. And that person would get, let's just say 10 years. But an individual who has a drug habit and sells drugs to get money to an undercover cop gets the same amount of time. How is that justice? So we need mandatory minimums on certain types of offenses, just because we also want to keep in mind, we want to treat similarly situated people the same and not have that disparity in there, because that's not fair either. But I do think that we need to look at our overall sentencing structure with an eye towards what our environment is now, where we want to go, and what is equitable and fair.
And just to follow up on that too, and this is my personal, I feel it kind of takes the power away from, if we are looking at case by case basis, those legislative mandatory minimums in the instance where we've seen by several of your predecessors and several prosecutors say, well, it's out of my hands. And also where it takes away that judicial discretion and everybody saying, hey, it's on the legislator. I think that eliminating those mandatory minimums, it will empower you to look at those case by case where you say, hey, this doesn't fit the time that's legislatively mandated. So I just wanted to throw that in.
No, and that's a great point. And to your comment, I'd like to add the fact that when I started, I asked our team to review all of our plea policies and guidelines to give more discretion to our prosecutors and to the judges so that we can do what's right. Because the criminal justice system in Maricopa County is made up of thousands of cases, and we need to look at them individually to come to the right resolution. And that's why I had our plea policies revised for that specific reason, and also created a robust diversion program. All of these criminal justice reform efforts, they're not just legislative, as you said. It's also administrative, and it's incumbent upon prosecutors to engage in this space as well.
Thank you. And okay, so I want to jump to this last legislative question. And I apologize because, I know you have a busy schedule, and, we want people to have access to you and be able to ask these questions or even address their concern. So as NCAO, Maricopa County Attorney, will you support efforts to allow people with nonviolent, non-dangerous offenses to earn expungements of their record outside of the diversion program? And I know there's, we need to expand those opportunities, but at least a start to allow people to earn expungements of those records.
Well, wait, and you're right. We do not have an expungement statute on the books in Arizona. Early in the legislative session, I had conversations with both Democrats and Republicans in the state and the House about looking at creating a sensible expungement law. And I was proud to lead those discussions, and it's part of my platform because I do think it's needed. We have people out there that, they made a mistake at one point and had a bad day, and now it's a barrier to employment and housing. And so in this day and age, we have to look at those. And I'm proud to have led those conversations, and I will continue to do so as your county attorney.
Allister, are you able to stay with us a little bit longer?
A couple minutes. I've got to leave to get across town for 1:30. It's going to take me a 25-minute drive.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go to, if Roe versus Wade were overturned, were reversed by the United States Supreme Court, would you prosecute women who have elected to have an abortion? Yes or no?
No.
Okay.
But here's why. Can I explain my answer?
Yeah.
Currently, there is no case before the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. And in the rare instance that it was, I will never prosecute a woman for their healthcare decisions. And I want to be very clear about that because my opponent continues to say that. I will not prosecute a woman for their healthcare decisions despite the archaic statute that we have in our Arizona statutes.
Thank you.
We have other bad people out there, very bad people that we need to focus our resources on, and not the woman who has made a choice for her healthcare reasons.
Thank you. I'm going to get to some of the chat questions now, and we need to keep it brief because of your time, and you generated so much interest. Do you take? I think you answered this before, but because I've seen a few questions on this, do you take police union money and contributions? Yes or no?
I've taken some police union money into my campaign account, and I think it was just 2, if I recall correctly. I'd have to go back and look at the campaign finance stuff. I've been so busy running the 3rd largest prosecution agency in the country. I do look at the campaign finance reports, but I've got 3 jobs right now.
Okay. So you're open to taking those contributions?
Yes, but I want to be very clear that I will never be beholden to any union. In fact, my opponent has taken resources from other types of unions and endorsements from other types of organizations. I will never be beholden to anybody. I talk about ethical excellence every day. I was on the State Bar's Ethics Committee. I am fair and impartial, and I will continue to be that as your county attorney. Thank you.
Who is on the advisory board is another question.
Well, we did a press release on that. I'm happy to direct you to our website, maricopacountyattorney.org. So the Citizens Advisory Board, we have released the names of those individuals and their affiliation for their professionals.
What are your thoughts around the militarization of the police department? So tanks and other types of equipment.
Well, Joe Arpairo's not there anymore. So, that's for them to do. Police have a function in this. How they spend their money is up to them. I believe that police should also not just be reactive, but proactive, and many agencies are. But that's a question for them. I can tell you at the county attorney's office, we don't have tanks and things like that.
Right. How do you feel about police in the schools?
That's a difficult question because I can see it both ways. When we have schools that have violence, and let's face it, there's trafficking in our schools, there's drug use and selling in our schools, there's bullying. If you have a resource officer that is helpful with that, I support it. But that's up to the district to make their own decisions on that, what the environment is for their schools. Because all of our districts across the vast, diverse Maricopa County has different needs. And so I trust the districts to make those decisions. And when it's appropriate, if they believe that they need officers in schools, then they should do that.
There's a question, how can an integrity unit be run by a longtime prosecutor, Rachel Mitchell, and how can that not be a conflict of interest?
Well, it's not a conflict of interest because it used to be under my predecessors that if there was a claim of innocence or excessive force, it was reviewed by the prosecutor who handled the case. Now that's a conflict of interest. This is an independent person who hasn't touched the case at all, who has been to national training on this, to be able to specialize in this, and only reports to the chief deputy and is not beholden to anybody else, and is able to put a different set of eyes on things.
And as I listen to you talk, and I'm so appreciative of your time. Thank you so much. In my head, I keep hearing, if this information were easily accessible, that's one piece. When we talk about transparency, but if I have to go digging for it, especially if I'm a person that doesn't really know how to navigate those waters, I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine.
If I don't know how to navigate those waters, so perhaps in the future you could really have someone or yourself look at how do we make this easy for people to really understand the questions and to hear the questions that are on the public's mind, because when I hear the level of anger in questions, and I sympathize with that. I totally understand. So there's that piece, in terms of future work and transparency. The other thing, you talked a little bit about if someone was convicted of a DUI and had killed someone in that process and then receiving the sentence that they did. For me personally, this is based on my experience with women in Perryville and talking to them and hearing their stories. It's hard for me to draw a distinction between the DUI offense and the substance abuse of, similar offense. And that there is such a need to address the underlying factors. So when we talk about the divesting or defunding of police and where the money would go, the money's got to come from somewhere. And so, for your office to be very transparent in the use of the allocated budget that you are given, and if there is excess, I think it would bring a measure of trust to the conversation to say, you know what, I think we can release this. But specifically why, and think out, stand up on top of the desk and think about things differently. And maybe we go against the system. I think in closing, what three things could you tell us that you say, look, I've been in this job for 1 year. I've seen historically, I have knowledge, but I've been in the job for 1 year. What are three things that I believe if I'm reelected, I can change to make this world a better place and to help us get through this period of turmoil.
Well, we've accomplished a lot in the last year, despite a pandemic. Things that began on day one, and I'm proud of those accomplishments and the hard-working men and women in the office of everything that we've done so far. It's quite remarkable. I challenge you to find any elected official that's accomplished as much as I have in 1 year. Now, moving forward, we're going to continue to make sure that we are looking at smart justice, smart criminal justice reforms. Moving forward, we are going to continue to keep families safe. And by that, I mean, we've changed our community outreach programs to reach children, students, adults, to give them the resources they need so that we're not just reactive. Moving forward, we're going to continue my commitment to transparency, accountability, and efficiency. And it's not just the data dashboard, but where you can go to our website and find all that information, but it's working with our stakeholders. It's working collaboratively with the community. It's working with our community advisory boards. It's working with the legislature and law enforcement, those that want to see our system be better. Because I'm committed to making sure, especially with criminal justice reforms, that those who want to do better and be better are given that opportunity and they're not institutionalized and not incarcerated. That is incumbent upon me, which is why we continue to take steps, and we're actually developing 2 new diversion programs in addition to our very robust one that we have now. That is my commitment. All of this falls under the veil of keeping our public, families, and the vulnerable safe. And I have proven that. I have a proven track record of accomplishments. And I urge all of you to learn more about me at my website, allisteradel.org. This way, when we do this together and have these conversations, it only improves the system. So I thank you guys for your time today too, and talking with me about how our community can be the best one it can be. Because I believe in Maricopa County. I'm a member of this community. I have been a prosecutor, I've been an administrator, I have the experience, and I have a proven track record. So it'll be an honor to continue to work hard and serve our community.
Thank you so much for your time. Please know that the Arizona Faith Network, wants to continue to work with your office, and safe travels on your jaunt across town here. So take care.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Stay safe and be well, okay?
You too. Thank you, Allister.
Bye.
Bye. Team, can you stay on?
Yep.
Let's wait till our participants